Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. In this video I will be doing something a little different, as I've never done it before. A vlog of me reading David Foster Wallace's magnum opus, Infinite Jest. This infamous example of postmodern or post-postmodern, as the case may be, maximalist and ergodic general fiction literature isn't something I ever would have picked up had my ex David not recommended I do so back in 2021 or early 2022. He'd read it a few years earlier, had found it, as far as I can remember, incisive and funny, and thought I might get something similar out of it. Now, when I actually decided to add this bish to my TBR last year, I kind of knew it probably wouldn't be my thing, since I'd looked up its particulars in the interim, and since, additionally, my bestest bookish friend, who completed Infinite Jest after DNFing it 9 times in a row, mad respect to her perseverance there, told me point blank she didn't think I would like it. Nonetheless, I stubbornly decided to charge right on ahead with my plan to read Infinite Jest, because I'm a masochistic idiot. My friend then asked me if I would consider vlogging my reading experience, so she could, let's be real, she could affectionately make fun of me, which, honestly, fair enough, I 1 billion% deserve that. I'd never done a reading vlog before, as I don't find the format super comfortable at the outset, but decided I could record a mini vlog of sorts for her benefit, and the benefit of my Discord server as a whole. I quickly realized this actually made my reading experience more, well, fun, quite frankly, and so decided to try my hand at making a longer form reading vlog for my channel, the end result of which will follow in a minute. This reading vlog will thus replace what would otherwise have been a more traditional book review of Infinite Jest. That being said, outside of the actual vlog footage, I will also add a more structured concluding segment that will serve as a kind of summarized review of the book, and everything will obviously be timestamped for viewer convenience, as always.
I've now read 3 chapters, which correspond to about 41 pages of the book. It's odd so far, is how I'm going to put it. Now, a bit of background context. Infinite Jest is considered I don't know about classic, but a big example of postmodern literature, I believe, and ergodic literature to some extent, because there are a fuck ton of footnotes. No, not footnotes, sorry, endnotes. And a part of the story is told in the endnotes. Yay! Although, actually, reading this on Kindle is going to make that way easier for me, thankfully. Yeah, I don't know. In chapter 1, we are introduced to a young fellow named Harold, with a Spanish-y sounding name, shortened to Hal. Hal seems to be an intellectually gifted young man. Perhaps you could even read them as neurodivergent. We'll see about that. Obviously, he has some mental health issues. He's attending a university interview with his uncle, but the people from the university have issues with his application because his grades are too good. He's also like a genius athlete, so an excellent tennis player. So I guess he's applying for an athletic scholarship, maybe? But like his grades were too high and he submitted some essays that sound too geniusy, I guess. But then his grades went down, so they will find this a bit sus. But then he has some kind of panic attack or seizure, what have you, and then is like sent to the emergency room. And the way that first chapter is written is very confusing. It's easy to read on the one hand because it's dialogue, and those paragraphs of dialogue are quite short, so you can go through them quite easily. But the dialogue itself, it feels very disjointed, but I guess it's a way for the author to show that his main character, Hal, is like struggling to keep up with the conversation around him, and he's like having a seizure or a panic attack or something. And they also say he's very shy and doesn't really talk much, and he's making these weird animal-like sounds. Also, I find it freaking hilarious that his name is Harold, because if any of you are familiar with the Harold meme, I use a Harold emote in my Discord conversations a lot. I feel like it's going to be very, like, context appropriate. And then in chapter 2, we're introduced to some dude whose name I can't remember, not even sure it was actually mentioned, who goes into wall of text descriptions and monologues, internal monologues, about his experience with cannabis. Like nitty-gritty detail, and I'm like, okay. He's waiting for a woman to drop by his place with a just massive amount of weed because he wants to, like, get obscenely high one last time before quitting. But I guess the implication here is that he won't quit because he's severely addicted. But the contrast between those walls of text and the preceding disjointed dialogue was a bit, I wasn't a big fan of that, but whatever. And then in chapter 3, we're back with Hal. I'm not really sure what the hell I read there, actually. I don't know if it was a memory of his, because at first you kind of think he's being sent to a shrink at age 10, 11, but then the conversation he has with the supposed shrink is very strange. And the way this is written, I guess Wallace maybe wanted to convey the fact that these characters are very cerebral, intellectual, schmort. The kid is intellectually gifted. Fair enough. And I don't know, it feels like maybe you're meant to take away a note of absurdist humor in relation to all of that as well, kind of like Nabokov does in some of his fiction. Because I'm getting a vague feeling of like reading Nabokov, but with Nabokov, I find his prose and that kind of stuff a lot smoother. It works so much better for me. Here already, I'm kind of like getting a bit annoyed at the just, taking a thesaurus and a dictionary and throwing any word that sounds interesting enough into the text. I don't want to be mean about this, but that's kind of how it's coming off at the minute. So it's kind of like, I see what you're trying to do, but it's also coming off as, oh, I'm just trying to lay on my knowledge of vocabulary a bit thickly, I guess. So here's an example though, and this is supposed to be a 10-year-old kid as well. I'm 10 for Pete's sake. I think maybe your appointment calendar squares got juggled. I'm the potentially gifted 10-year-old tennis and lexical prodigy whose mum's a continental mover and shaker in the prescriptive grammar academic world and whose dad's a towering figure in optical and avant-garde film circles and single-handedly founded the Enfield Tennis Academy, but drinks wild turkey at like 5 a.m. and pitches over sideways during dawn drills on the courts some days, and some days presents with delusions about people's mouths moving but nothing coming out. Yeah, because the kid seems to think everyone around him believe he doesn't actually speak, and he's like, no, I am speaking, I'm a sensitive person. Hello? Is no one listening to me? So I guess, is he mute but he doesn't realize it? I don't know. I'm not even up to / yet, and the condensed OED, much less Quebec or malevolent lurias. I'm sorry, even if you're a 10-year-old with 180 IQ, insofar as that is even possible, I think the maximum on test is 160, but whatever. No, you don't talk like that as a gifted 10-year-old. I was an intellectually gifted child, I didn't talk like that. It's way too self-aware for a 10-year-old. I'm like, So now I'm kind of wondering, is this actually a memory, or is this some kind of delusion? Because then the shrink he's supposedly speaking with then drops this, that your quote-unquote complimentary Dunlop wide-body tennis racket, super secret formulaic composition materials of high modulus graphite-reinforced polycarbonate, polybutylene resin are organochemically identical. I say again, identical to the gyroscopic balance sensor and mise-en-scène appropriation card and priapistic entertainment cartridge implanted in your very own towering father's anaplastic cerebrum after his cruel series of detoxifications and convolution smoothings and gastrectomy and prostatectomy and pancreatectomy and phalloctomy. What is that? Who talks like that? So is the book going to be nothing but that kind of writing? So my guess at the minute, based on 3 chapters, is that Harold is not doing very well in his head. I feel like this is actually him just like going on in his own head, because then at the end of that chapter it kind of seems like this supposed shrink is his own father. That's my theory at the minute. We'll see if it pans out that he is in fact a bit off his meds, but that's what I'm going with at the minute, and we'll see as I go through the text. I am now at page 209 of David Foster Wallace's Infinite Jest. It's not really a jest for me, not really getting any haha moments. Although supposedly there's a fair bit of humor in there, but if there is, it's not connecting with my brain. I don't know what the fuck I'm reading. That is my feeling at the moment. I don't know what the fuck it is. It barely counts as a novel for me right now. Which, might sound harsh, but that is the vibe I'm getting, because for me, and fair enough, this is personal, fiction as literature, fiction literature has at its heart to be storytelling. It's a storytelling art form for me. Like the different kinds of literature, right? There's poetry and there's drama and stuff, so that's valid, as the kids say. But like, if you're going to do a novel, fiction literature, I need a story. And I'm not really getting a story so far. This thing is so weird. There is no plot yet. I don't think there is going to be one. I've been reading stuff on Reddit about this as well because I'm procrastinating actually picking it back up. I see people arguing, yeah, Wallace wanted the reader to experience being in his head and experiencing his thoughts. But I'm like, that's not fiction, really? I mean, it is, of course, it technically is still a novel. I'm saying it's borderline not fiction for me, but it still is. It's that really edges area of fiction literature. But it's kind of like, if you just want someone to experience what it's like to be in your head, hey, that's a bit egotistical, but pretty harmless in and of itself, fine. But then it's like, you're not really trying to connect with people by telling a story, are you? And to be clear, this is one person's opinion. I'm not actually saying that that was David Foster Wallace's intent. But I'm just, like, if some people are defending this novel with that argument, and it kind of just proves my impression, in a way. There is no structure in this thing. I got to a point where I was like, I thought there might be a structure, and I'm like, okay, no. Any pretense at the structure has fucked right off now. Got it. It's disjointed as fuck. You still get chapters with this Harold dude, some of his family members, his peeps, his homies at the Tannis Academy. You've been introduced to a fair few drug addict POV chapters, just a random assembly of drug addicts. And fine, I guess in this sense, addiction is a theme of the novel. And I've been introduced to a spy. But that didn't even actually make sense, because it was like, the spy is described as a triple agent, but it doesn't really work that way. It's just more a double agent that switched sides. To me, if you're gonna call it a triple agent, then I would expect a third party to be involved in the whole setup. But it's still just two sides. So for Canadian separatist movements, and fine, my boyfriend kind of told me there was Quebecois separatism back in the 1970s, so it's based on a real thing, fair enough. And so this spy meets with an American government representative who cross-dresses for whatever reason. But that's the point of views I've had so far. Very disjointed, like I said. I've already encountered a footnote, sorry, not a footnote, it kind of reads as a footnote in my Kindle edition, but like an endnote that was just a fictitious, obviously, filmography. I've already skipped a few endnotes. I might come back to them later, but the endnotes that would require me to manually go at the end of my Kindle, and I'm like, I can't be fucked up a minute. To the people who argue that the thing of like you having to switch from the main text to the endnotes and back and stuff, it mimics a tennis game. Have you ever played tennis or watched a fucking game of tennis? I have actually played some tennis. My parents played a lot of tennis when I was younger. I've seen a fair bit of Wimbledon and Roland Garros. Have you ever seen tennis? It's pretty quick. Like, the back and forth of the ball between the players and their rackets is actually quite fast. When I'm taking 10 minutes out of my time from the main text to read a fucking endnote, it's not like playing tennis. Fuck off. Maybe that's what Wallace wanted to do, but in that respect, I think he kind of failed. It just takes me out of the main text. It disconnects me from a text I'm already not connecting with hard. It doesn't feel like a tennis match. Not just, And there are, yes, long, elaborate descriptions of the beautiful game of tennis. That's valid. If you like tennis, you vibe with that. Yay, it's kind of like, I watched The Queen's Gambit. I liked it well enough, but the whole chess thing, I kind of bounced off of. And that's fair, to each their own. But like the tennis stuff, I just don't care about. But then I don't really care about anything else. They're like itty-bitty bits of world building that are marginally interesting, some commentary, but then it's buried in this unstructured rambling. You switch from chapters with like disjointed dialogues, then you have chapters that are like stream of consciousness, or what I'm going to call stream of narration, walls of text. Like there was this one chapter meant to convey the experience of what I'm going to assume is supposed to be a black, poor, uneducated heroin addict. And it's not really stream of consciousness because you don't really get a sense of interiority from this character, but it's definitely stream of narration, and there are lots of spelling mistakes, and I get that it's going for this very uber realistic thing where you're like conveying how this person would actually speak in real life. Although one could argue it might be borderline over the top and thus a bit condescending, but whatever. I kind of get that, but the fact is that in practice, it makes it borderline unreadable. It was 10 pages of that, and I just skim read the lot of it. It was hurting my brain. I can kind of respect the intent there, but at that point, I'll just watch Requiem for a Dream if I want that kind of shit. I want the grotesque tragedy of like severe drug addiction and the squalor and decrepitude, no, not decrepitude, but like, yeah, the horribleness of that. Like, there's a reason there are conventions in literary storytelling, is kind of my feeling about it. And so I'm just disconnecting from the text, and I can kind of rationally see it's squalid and tragic and gross and heroin addiction, bleh. But because I'm bouncing off of the text so fucking hard, I don't feel any of it. There is no emotional connection whatsoever. There is no actual pathos. Especially then because it bounces from that kind of shit to then super nerdy, intellectually minded people using very obscure words or uncommon words from the dictionary, and like the shift, the whiplash is wild. Then conversely, or additionally rather, there are bits of writing that to me are just plain bad. Bad and clunky. Cause like at one point you got to the Canadian spy and the American government official are in the desert outside of Tucson, and there's like a bit of a sentence that's like something about the unbeautiful webs of the poisonous US species of spider, black widow. I'm like, wait, what? That's not indulging in super detailed descriptions with 10 different words you need to use a dictionary to understand. And I'm exaggerating because honestly, I'm not having that hard of a time with the vocabulary, but that will depend on a person's level of vocabulary, obviously. That is one redundant as fuck bit of sentence. You don't actually need to use all of those words that basically amount to saying the exact same fucking thing. That to me is actually bad writing. It's excess for the sake of excess, and I know that apparently that's kind of part of the point of the whole thing and blah blah blah. I don't give a fuck. It reads as bad. Because like you just needed to say the unbeautiful webs of black widows. Because anyone who's gonna pick Infinite Jest fucking knows what a black widow is. Right? And you don't need to say that it's from the US. The people are outside of Tucson in Arizona. It's in the United States. Again, anyone who picks this fucking book up already knows that. Like, why would you write it that way? There is absolutely no justification to write it that way. I'm sorry, not sorry. I also noticed, like, with the French, there are bits of French in the text because Quebecois are, like, featured. I can read French. Some of the French is actually incorrect. Sometimes I check to make sure, because I know that Quebecois French can be a bit different from, like, European French, let's say. But no, it's straight up, like, errors in the French. Since I know that Wallace was intelligent and educated, I'm hoping it's just, like, a way to convey like the stereotypical American looking down upon Canadians and languages other than English. I'm gonna be generous and assume that that's what that was, because otherwise it was a bit, I'm like, that's not actually how you write that, but okay. And then yeah, there was a chapter with a woman on a psych ward. That was kind of alright, because when there's writing about mental illness and addiction, like I can kind of tell that Wallace is writing from experience. And I know for a fact that he was very clinically depressed most of his life. He committed suicide. He was a drug addict as well, an alcoholic. So there I can kind of feel crumbs of something, because like I feel, oh, you're writing from experience, you kind of get that mental space. But then last night I left off, I was exhausted, and like the text is legitimately tiring. I'm bored, but again, because I've also seen like, you know, the discourse. Oh, yeah, you're bored, because, like, that's the whole point of the commentary on our short attention spans and people addicted to television. Hey, there's nothing wrong with enjoying telly and just switching your brain off because you're tired. For what, you know what, to each their own, shut the fuck up. So that's one thing. B, I'm bored, not because I got a baby brain attention span or because I'm an ignoramus. I'm bored precisely because my intellect is not really being engaged in a pleasurable way, and my emotions aren't being engaged. It's that kind of boredom. And also because I'm so fucking disconnected from the text, because I'm bouncing off of the writing so hard, and the structurelessness of the book. And it's disappointing because there are kernels of like genuine commentary and insight. But that's the thing, so I left off last night. I was tired. I wanted to leave off on a completed chapter, but this chapter just kept going on and on. I don't even know what the fuck I was reading. I was with Hal and friends at the tennis academy, and then I got into an email exchange, and then there were 2 pages with like statements in all caps. Was it like a government statement about advertising or something? And then it segues into, is that meant to be one of Harold's dissertations? It's like commentary on the reasons why people stopped using video during phone calls. But it's like the shift again from one thing to the other, and I'm like, whoa, what the fuck am I reading? What the fuck is happening? It's disappointing because there's actually interesting commentary in what I left off reading of like, oh, people are self-conscious when there's camera on video chats. etc. Although it's also interesting because it aged very poorly in the sense that actually people very much continue to use video chat. People haven't en masse gone back to just using the regular telephone. It could still happen in the future, I guess, if you really want to double down on the world's gonna go to shit and dystopia, rah rah. Sure. But otherwise, no. If anything, it's a great way to connect more realistically with long-distance friends, family members, lovers, etc., because it adds sensory input, so that's a good thing. So that was interesting. But see, that was actually interesting. I'm not going to say it wasn't. That's legitimately interesting commentary discussion, but it's kind of lost in the fog of everything else. In terms of conveying, meaningful theming, infinitely better ways to do it. That book is a fucking mess. Like, that's my overwhelming impression right now. And disclaimer that I'm very much aware that I'm a masochistic dumbass for reading this and not DNFing. I'm very much aware of that. Okay, well, till next time. I have now managed to get to, basically the halfway point of the book. I thought it was 1,200 pages. Nah, it's 1,400 pages. Yay! I still maintain this book is a garbled mess. Just one giant, sprawling mess with some little bits that are good to engaging here and there, but they are few and far between. Yeah, there is no plot in this book. I think I said this last time. It barely qualifies as a novel for me. It does read as the kind of book that people who aren't fan of intellectual folks point at and go, haha, look at this silly muppetry. And I mean, I kind of get it. I mean, I still think intellectual endeavors are worthwhile, but I understand the sentiment here, because what is this thing? What's the point? I don't even understand why it's so highly regarded by people who enjoy these kinds of books. There is theming, don't get me wrong. There are ideas in the narrative, but it's kind of lost in the sauce of just excess word vomiting. Reading this book feels like I'm being force-fed words at times. And some of the stuff that is written in this book is redundant, and that to me is bad. It doesn't add anything useful to the story or to the themes of the book. It's just redundant and exhausting in a way. Cognitively exhausting. So I can't explain what's really happened in the book because there is no real plot. I've had chapters where I've been with Hal and friends, as they call them, at the tennis academy, and the bits about tennis, I don't care. And again, that's a personal preference thing. Sometimes I hang out with the drug addicts at the Ennet halfway house, and there is kind of a main character there, Don Gately, and he talks a lot about how AA has helped him. That's cool. Look, that's valid. As I understand it, Mr. Wallace himself benefited from his experience with AA. That's great. I'm not going to look down on that. That's great if it helps with addiction and stuff. But he talks a lot about that and repeats himself in a way because he doesn't understand the God part of the 12-step program, blah, blah, blah. And then, okay, I've seen a couple characters that kind of link back to the tennis peeps side of the story. And then you've got this spy thing with Quebecan separatists and a terrorist cell of one of the separatist groups. And it's infuriating, right? Because in some of those shorter chapters, it feels like there's a heavy theming dump within the dialogue between the Canadian guy and then the American guy. It's like, oh yeah, entertainment can brainwash people and make them mindless couch potatoes. Okay, I mean, it's very overt. And then there's this back and forth of yeah, that's the cost of freedom, and you Americans, that's what you indulge in. But then the American guy's like, yeah, but our values of freedom and the pursuit of happiness. So what if some people choose to be brain dead zombies in front of their screens? It just comes with the territory. And the other guy's like, yo, you need greater values to guide you forward in life, and blah, blah, blah. I don't even think the commentary itself is bad or worthless. I think there's something to it, but because there's this very sharp contrast between this very overt, heavy theming dump, is what I'm going to call it, and the rest of the book's garbled messness, it just doesn't land very well. It doesn't feel particularly effective. And I'm like, yeah, that kind of commentary on entertainment and then how that links to addiction, because obviously addiction is a big conceptual through line of the book. I've seen that done better elsewhere. In shorter books for one thing, but fine, a book doesn't have to be shorter to be good. That's not even what I'm trying to say. But I've seen that better done elsewhere. In more overt science fiction. So I will not agree. Apparently some people consider Infinite Jest science fiction. I don't think it's science fiction. That being said, it's not 100% pure general fiction either. It has a speculative aspect, but I don't think that speculative aspect is done or utilized well at all. It feels very uncommitted to that part of its nature as I feel it, shall we say. I guess placing the story in the near future with tech that is I mean, apart from the video stuff, nothing is really different, but that's part of the problem. Okay, so you have a bit of tech that's a bit more advanced than what you would have had in the 1980s and 90s, okay? So it's peri-dystopian, near future in its setting and quality to explore the excesses of, like, indulgent entertainment, I guess, and then addiction tied to that. But at the same time, the world building is so poor with regards to that element. Everything else feels quite dated. I almost feel like this should be a science fiction book, or I mean an attempt at a very mildly science fiction book from the 60s, not something that was published in the 90s. Because the authorial voice does feel a bit, well, he was a Gen X and not a boomer, but it does feel from that generation in a way that is, shall we say, not to my personal preference, although I don't like broad generalization based on generations either, so whatever. But it feels very dated in places. So everything feels like it is today, or rather like it was in the 90s, and even then 80s, 90s. But then you have those little bits of like future imagined tech, and none of it meshes. None of it comes together in a way that feels credible or convincing. It has this very wishy-washy, uncommitted feeling I've mostly experienced with magical realism. This like in-between nothing burger of like, what are you trying to do with this? Like, if you want to explore those ideas into actual science fiction in a way. Because some of the commentary, I would argue, you can find in Aldous Huxley's Brave New World, although the setting is more extreme and a bit out there in places, but still, I think there's something interesting done with that. Or even with books like, I discussed this with my friend, Parable of Sower or The Handmaid's Tale. They are like near future dystopias. With Parable of the Sower, you have a very, very, very small science fiction-y element based on a pharmaceutical, though, so that kind of makes it relevant to this discussion, given the heavy prevalence of pharmacopoeia in Infinite Jest. And those authors know how to utilize those kinds of settings so much better, in my opinion. Here, I'm kind of like, what are you trying to do? Why are you doing it this way? Because I think you could explore the excesses of entertainment as addiction and in relation to addiction in an entirely 100% general fiction setting. But doing this way triggers my SFF reader lens a little bit. And if I read it through that lens a little bit, it fails miserably. It just doesn't work the way it was written with that specific aspect. Like I said, it's just a barrage of words. It doesn't give me anything thoughtful or meaningful. It's just excess for the sake of excess. I understand some people argue that's precisely the point, but then again, it comes back to this thing of meta-critique in fiction is so freaking hard to pull off. In my opinion, 9 times out of 10, it fails. And I think it fails here because it's all well and good to try and critique postmodern authors, I guess, who try and be super fancy with words and structure. Like, oh, haha, look at what these morons did. Or maybe not those morons, but like, look at what these peeps did with this. Isn't it all a bit silly? I'm going to do it too and show you, haha, how silly this is. It doesn't come across that way. You're just doing the exact same thing. And so, yeah. It's like I said to my friend, I feel like I've stumbled into the horseshoe theory of literature with this book. If you don't use enough words, you won't have enough specificity and detail to convey a setting, to convey thoughts and feelings from your characters, to convey ideas you want to weave into your narrative, to convey the truth, if you will, of your story. Too many words, it does the same thing, basically, because I'm being sensory overwhelmed by all these words. My brain can't process. Well, it's not even a question of my brain being able to process. I understand the words themselves. But since you got these like chunky sentences, it becomes meaningless in a way. So you don't end up conveying a truth in large parts of the book. I'm not even saying it's all of the book, but so it amounts to the same thing as just not using enough words. So yeah, horseshoe theory of literature. I mean, it's not like I've gotten nothing out of this book. There's a chapter where the tennis peeps basically LARP nuclear warfare. That was mildly amusing in a very dark humor sort of way. I was like, oh, your kids playing at nuking each other. And like they have a very complex system of rules. They also take actual geopolitics into account. It's very nerdy and edgy. I'm sure my ex loved that chapter. And that was okay. I was like, haha, in a good way. I was like, okay, I get the haha here. Nice. There are a couple chapters, or not even chapters, but sections of chapters about some of the drug addict characters, and there is some pathos there, and it's like horrible. But there is no greater story that is emerging from this book. There is no real cohesion to its disparate elements. The spy thing, it's kind of like, I don't give a shit. And why Canada? Again, apart from, Americans kind of historically making fun of Canada, and not every American, obviously. Apart from maybe that angle, I have nothing. Like, why are you focusing so much on Canada and then Quebecans because they speak French? Like, is that the joke? And again, the commentary you get in those chapters or sections of chapters isn't worthless, but because it's so overt and unsubtle, the conversations themselves aren't super unsubtle, but it's so obvious it's pushing this idea of like, mindless entertainment, bad. Kind of. Contrasted to everything else, it just doesn't work either. So it's kind of like, what are you doing? I'm exhausted by this book. Like, cognitively exhausted. I'm not getting, much of anything in terms of emotional engagement, intellectual engagement. Because again, that's what I actually want from this kind of book. So again, you're making fun of mindless entertainment. It's not that this thing is mindless, but it's very meaningless in a lot of ways. So that kind of amounts to being the thing you're trying to critique, which is, it goes back to my point that trying to do meta critique like this, it can be done, but I mean, it's freaking rare that it actually fully works, I think. Not that I've even encountered that much of it, but like on this scale and trying to do so many different things, I guess. Because I'm not even sure. Like, what's the tennis got to do with anything besides just indulging in very excessive descriptions? I don't know. It's so boring, but whatever. The audiobook is a godsend. Because holy shit, and the footnotes, I just don't give a fuck anymore. Like, I don't care. Like, some bits are interesting, but there's so few and far between. I just don't care. And I'm an idiot for reading this once again, and I'm fully aware of that. Final thoughts before I leave off for this bit. I can see that Wallace could write, and that he was an intelligent, thoughtful man. Like, I can see that in the book, and that's why it's also maddening. Because obviously there's like, for me, in my personal opinion, there is potential for something really good in here, but I'm not seeing that potential actually realized. Because there are bits that are very well written, and he's juggling different kinds of character voices with, some proficiency, definitely. And obviously, this man had things to say about contemporary society, and I can see some of that in the book, but it's just lost in the sauce of the novels. Garbled messness. So it's so frustrating in a way. I know you could write, dude, but then why did you write it this way? It's just, my brain hurts. Hello again. I am now at about the 80% mark, I believe, of Infinite Jest. I've reached the point where I am deeply sick and tired of it. I'm just very much ready to be done with it. It's not as if I haven't encountered any other good bits in it. There was actually a chapter, probably wasn't even an entire chapter, because now there's some chapters that last for 70 pages. Hell, the penultimate chapter of Infinite Jest, as indicated on my Kindle, is 100 plus pages. Who writes 100 plus pages chapters? But anyway, there was a section of a chapter that was quite moving, where a character discusses depression with another, and how depression can rob you of your emotions, and because of that make you quite empathyless. I actually shed a few tears reading that, because it very strongly reminded me of my ex and his experience of depression, or I mean, what I witnessed of it. Not so much mine, though I could also relate to it on a personal level, somewhat. So that was good. I would have, enjoyed more of that kind of meaningful commentary, I don't know. But then conversely, there's also a bruv who finds catharsis by killing rats in the streets, and then stray cats, and even the odd dog, because a bit sociopathic around the edges, I guess. So that was neat. No, and then there was a description of a male prostitute who was raped by his father as a child. Again, it's not like those things don't exist, and I understand that that would be part of a lot of drug addicts' backgrounds. So I'm not arguing it was gratuitous, it was just a bit heavy going. Because then, once again, those tonal shifts. Then we're back with Hal and friends at the tennis academy, and it's kind of like, I just don't freaking know. Well, I'm not quite done with it, but I'm very ready to be done, so hopefully I can finish it tonight, at the very least tomorrow, because, I can't do this anymore. Help!
Hello everyone. Sorry it's actually been 2 days since I finished David Foster Wallace's Infinite Jest. Oh, let me tell you, by the end, I was not laughing. Oh no. No, I did not laugh, but I made it. I read all 1,400 pages of that frickin' thing, and no, by the end I wasn't even looking up the endnotes anymore. I just didn't give a shit, and that's that. I did not like this book. I was mad when I finished it. I was so mad because it has just, whatever the fuck ending. I think I more or less understood it. Or maybe I didn't. I just don't give a fuck. So yes, this book wasn't for me, clearly. There were some good bits in it, too, as I stated along the sort of reading vlog, but I'll save all of that for a more structured and coherent conclusion, which we'll get at a later point. But so, I suffered, but I made it. I freaking read Infinite Jest, and it only cost me my sanity. Not entirely, of course, but goddamn. Now, as promised, I will go into a more structured and sort of summarized review of Infinite Jest, so I can get all of my thoughts about it out there for good. With regards to plot, structure, or rather lack thereof, I would like to, first and foremost, formally apologize to every book I ever criticized for its lack of proper and or conventional structure. I was, believe me, but a sweet summer child who clearly didn't know what true chaos of form entailed in literature. Because like I said in the vlog, Infinite Jest, in my personal book, barely qualifies as a novel. There was no real plot to speak of. The structure was a sprawling mess of indulgent excess. And to reiterate, no, I don't care that this was probably by design and part of the supposed point. This shit right here is why people make fun of postmodernism, or post-postmodernism in the arts. For me, fiction literature is a storytelling art form. I will die on this subjective, short, but so what hill, and given Infinite Jest barely, just barely tells a cogent and meaningful story, it barely qualifies as fiction literature as a novel. Q-E-freaking-D. Those 1,400 pages were not justified, and fuck the endnotes once again, because what little meaningful commentary, theming emotionality there was in this text was pretty much obliterated by the sheer volume of lit babble, inflating, bloating, padding it out. See what I did there? I repeat that reading Infinite Jest felt like I was being force-fed words, and that it made me realize horseshoe theory can in fact be applied to literature. If flat and too sparse writing seldom achieves much in terms of conveying ideas, emotions, meaning, what have you, neither does its indulgently, bloatedly excessive counterpart. I sure learned that the hard way. Fuck me. As to prose, not all of it was bad, by any means. I can tell Wallace could, in fact, write, in the sense that he could competently and more or less effectively at times switch between different writing styles. But being able to juggle writing styles like this doesn't mean one should just shove all of them in one book and cut them all up across wildly dissonant chapters like he did. Can we agree that just because you can do something doesn't mean you necessarily should? And that's a lesson you can apply to basically every domain of life. Because, yeah, the amount of tonal whiplash I experienced reading this book was insane. The structural whiplash I experienced wasn't any better, to come back to that. Obscenely long walls of text, not to mention obscenely long fucking sentences, alternated with snappy dialogues, drug-fueled internal monologues, email transcripts, serialized anecdotes, an academic essay, and political meeting minutes. Just why? And yes, it did reek of tryhardism in places. Sue me. I didn't even mind the vocabulary, it wasn't that advanced, all things considered, but like, why am I not bothered by this shit when Mieville or Nabokov does it? Well, because their vocabulary gets woven into their narratives in a way that feels infinitely, yes I did, more organic. In terms of characters, I didn't care about anyone, really, or anything in Infinite Jest, which is like, ugh, big whoop, I guess. What I find really bizarre, however, is that for something that is, once again, 1,400 pages long, I found the book's character work surprisingly superficial across most of its protagonists. It's not that it was non-existent or even bad per se, to be crystal clear here, but more so that I expected a lot more depth given the sheer hugeness of this pseudo-tale. As to world building, again, this one is really freaking weird genre-wise. Infinite Jest, I maintain, primarily reads as general fiction, yes, but it is technically set in the near future as imagined in the late 1980s by Wallace, and features a North American landscape that is a little different from our own. And I think this genre-bending choice, if you will, was not only entirely unnecessary for the book's theming, such as I read it, but just really poorly executed, because it was underdeveloped, or rather developed in a way too narrow and thus uncommitted fashion. I felt at times like I was reading light dystopian or very light science fiction that has aged really, and I mean really badly. Think something rather mediocre written in, say, the 1960s. If you contrast this to the kind of mild and subtle world building you find in, for instance, Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale or Butler's Parable of the Sower, Infinite Jest doesn't come off as thoughtfully prescient, it comes off as incredibly clunky. And I repeat, its theming did not need this weird speculative literature light framing. Or, conversely, if Wallace really wanted to play with the idea of dystopian or quasi-dystopian entertainment addiction, he should have committed more fully to sheer speculation, because as it stands, I'd argue Brave New World does that stuff way better and in a much more concise, not to mention memorable manner. Basically, what it all comes down to is Wallace's chonker suffers from vaguely residing in the wishy-washy nothing burger genre space magically realist novels occupy. So what about theming? Well, as I think and hope transpired in the vlog, the only merit I found in Infinite Jest, because no, it wasn't all negative, it's not the worst thing I've ever read, it wasn't good, were its bits of commentary, theming on addiction, and sure, linked to that, mental illness more broadly, despair tied to depression, and entertainment. Kind of. I say kind of because really at the end of the day, entertainment itself is critiqued through the lens of addiction and the destruction it wreaks on individuals and fine society with regards to questions of individual freedom, responsibility, etc., especially if you factor in the spy plotline, but there are also issues there, so whatever. So that's why, really, I think the individual tragedy of addiction specifically is what comes through the text the most. Hence why I referenced Requiem for a Dream in the vlog at one point. Not that I've actually watched it, to be clear, I just know what it's about. And yes, I'm aware this, alongside depression, is something with which Wallace was intimately familiar, unfortunately for him. But this is probably why the emotional impact of this material comes through the text as strongly as it does. As a fellow mental illness sufferer, although I haven't experienced addiction, thankfully, I could definitely tell Wallace wrote a lot of the addiction and depression stuff straight from the source of very painful experience. And as it so happens, yeah, the best parts by light years of the book were indeed some of those that dealt with the horror of addiction and the agony of severe depression. What maddens me, however, as you undoubtedly saw a few times in the vlog, is that so much of that was then lost in the freaking sauce of the book's inherent indulgent excess. And I'm thus left with the following question. Was the haha, got him aspect of the book, reflecting the indulgent excess of addiction by being itself indulgently excessive in style, really worth it? Given I felt it took away from its thematic and emotional impact overall, I really don't think so. It's near impossible to pull off this kind of, I called it meta critique in the vlog. I don't think that's the right concept, but fuck it. Because 90% of the time, you just end up reifying the thing you're trying to criticize. That's how I see it. And so I just don't think Wallace pulled it off here. Like I said in my introduction, I was originally recommended Infinite Jest by my ex David. Having now read it, I kind of get why he relates or related to this in places, and without going into any deeper detail, kind of breaks my heart, honestly. But outside of that, I don't understand why he or anyone else finds so impactful, much less funny about this one. Okay, fine, I'll concede once again the eschaton thing, so the nuclear warfare LARPing game, was amusing. Haha, in a very dark humor sort of way. I'll give David that. Fine. But beyond that, nope, I don't get it. David Foster Wallace's magnum opus didn't rise above a 3 to a 3.5 out of 10 because, for me, it wasn't so much an infinite jest as it was, well, a bad joke. And that concludes my vlog and sort of review of David Foster Wallace's Infinite Jest. Never again. I hope you found this video interesting, engaging, entertaining, what have you, all the good things. If you want to share thoughts, feelings about this book in the comments down below, you're more than welcome to do so. But on that very final note, I hope you will have a lovely day, evening, or whichever time of day you prefer. Do take good care of yourselves. Thank you for the continued support, and I shall see you all hopefully reasonably soon in the next video. But until then, bye-bye.